I'm Mike Pietchuk, and we're from soyouwanttowrite.org. Our basic purpose is we connect writers with literary experts, agents, authors, editors, and we do that so that you can improve your writing and get published. And before I introduce Jessica, I just want to invite you to sign up for our WriterHive 5. It's a weekly roundup of the best videos, articles, events, quotes, and publishing opportunities from around the world. So if you want to head to soyouwanttowrite.org/WH5, stands for WriterHive 5. I'll drop that link in a second. You can get onto our list, and we'll email you every Friday with that info. And if you like what you hear from Jessica today, you can book a one-on-one with her, where she'll read 20 pages of your book and a synopsis of your book, and meet with you 45 minutes on Zoom and just give you some really good feedback about your work, which is incredibly valuable from a literary agent like Jessica. And I'll drop a link for that as well and a 10% discount. But enough of that. Let me introduce to you Jessica Reino. And today we're talking about scene writing. This workshop is all about how to improve your setting, your POV, dialogue, and move your story forward. I remember when I started as a writer almost 10 years ago, well, no, probably about 10 years ago, I was just writing exposition, right? This happened, then that happened, then that happened. I was telling, basically I was, a journalist, or I was blogging my book instead of actually writing scenes. And I found out very quickly that if you want to write well, you have to know how to craft a scene, right? Think about when you watch your favorite Netflix show. It's not just one unending series of events. It's little scenes. It's two people in a room. It's two groups fighting. It's little scenes of things happening. So it's incredibly important to figure out how to do that well. And Jessica is going to teach us how to do that today. She is a senior literary agent at Metamorphosis Literary Agency with agents across the U.S. And she's had a very long and an excellent publishing career, has worked as an author coach, freelance substantive editor with Panda Moon. She is a multi-genre author herself and a literary agent. And so it's really given her a wide breadth and a depth of experience in the literary world, and she knows storytelling. She's a member of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, the Women's Fiction Writers Association, where she leads webinars. And she's contributed to the Children's Writers Guild online magazine. She's a reviewer for Story Monsters, Inc. And if you're on Twitter, and I hope you are as a writer, it's a very active community for writers. If you're familiar with hashtag the Writer's Zen, that was Jessica's, she birthed that. So enough from me. I want to turn it over to Jessica. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me, and welcome everyone. Thank you very much, Mike. So happy Sunday. Good morning. I'm not going to put everyone to work just yet, so I'll let you all relax, settle in, and I am going to share my screen. I have a little PowerPoint presentation just about, what exactly is a scene. And when we think of a scene, as Mike had mentioned, you're thinking Netflix and movies and plays, but what exactly does that mean in terms of a novel? So that's what we're going to investigate. And when we're doing those little bits of storytelling in the scene, it actually serves, more than one purpose. So it's going to help you get to know your characters. It's going to help you craft an arc. It's going to help you with your synopsis, which is the so dreaded and awful. You're done writing your book. The last thing you want to do is write your synopsis. But if you do things scene by scene, this actually makes it so much easier. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So hang with me for 2 seconds while I do that. All right, we're good to go. So today it's Scene Writing with me, Jessica Reino. So we're going to go ahead and talk about what a scene is in a general sense. So the Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines a scene as one of the subdivisions of a play, such as a division of an act presenting continuous action in one place, a single situation or unit of dialogue in a play, or a motion picture or television episode or sequence. So you're probably asking yourselves, what does this have to do with the novel? Well, it actually has everything to do with the novel. So let's go ahead and dive in. So in your novel, a scene is the smallest form of storytelling. So I like to think of it as your entire book is a ruler, right? So each chapter is an inch, and each scene are the dashes of measurement in between. Because when you have your finished product, that is linear, right? But when you're writing, it depends on how you write. If you're a pantser, a plotter, you're going to do things nonlinear, and that is where, if you're crafting a scene, that can help you so much. It can help with writer's block because, again, it doesn't have to be linear. If you have a scene in your head, like, okay, the hero's journey, you know, you have your hero, right? Your hero has to have the rising action, then the falling action. It has to have a fight scene. It has to, you know, resolve the conflict. So you know that you need to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you can craft your scenes at any point in that timeline. So that's where it gets, you know, really helpful, and it can help you with writer's block because sometimes you're so focused on writing that linear novel that you can't get out of your own way sometimes. And then, you know, if you just have one inspiration for a scene, you can write that scene and build your novel that way. You can go backwards, you can go forwards. So, you know, your end product is that linear timeline. But again, if you're doing time travel or something like that, it might jump around, but your finished product is, you know, beginning, middle, and end. But while you're crafting it, you can do whatever you want. You're the storyteller, you're the creator of your own world. So in that scene, there is only one action that is occurring at any given time. But in the scene, it still needs to contain an arc. So your scene serves to pull your reader into your story and the world that you have created, which again would be the same as, you know, a Netflix movie or TV show. So what exactly does that mean in the grand scope of your novel? What does a scene consist of? So you need to put elements of tone, pacing, narrative voice and point of view, theme, structure, sensory detail, which is super, super important, and stakes. So everything you put in your book has to have these elements to it. It can be, you know, minor elements. It doesn't have to be overflowing with action, but there needs to be a change happening. You need to get your character from point A to point B. So we're going to dive into what exactly that means. So when we're talking about tone, right, is your attitude or feeling that you want to convey. So when I'm going through scenes, I'm really looking at what the purpose of the scene is. So a lot of times, you know, we tend to overwrite things. Sometimes we can be too descriptive in what we're trying to convey. So this actually serves a great purpose because you can cut those out. I mean, they might be beautiful, flowery language, and it's wonderful to read to the ear, but it doesn't move the story forward. So we need to really keep in mind what the purpose of our scene is, the purpose of, you know, everything we're doing in our writing. And next is pacing. So pacing, I want you to, again, think about the purpose of your scene and how does that play out in the pacing of the chapter and then in your overall story arc. So what rate do you want that scene to unfold for the reader? So depending on the purpose of that scene, it might be the character is reflecting on some information they found out, or they're reactive to some information they found out, or other characters in that particular scene and setting. So that's always something you want to keep in mind.
Sorry,
And then,
Jessica.
yes.
I'm just getting some messages here that the PowerPoint is still on the first slide.
No. Okay, hold on.
So while people are watching, I'm not sure it's moving ahead. Oops.
Okay.
So let's maybe you want to load it up again.
All right, let me see. I am so sorry about that, everyone.
I'm not sure what's happening.
Can everyone see that now? No?
Doesn't look like the stream has started up again.
All right, let me see. Can you see it now?
I did get a notification, but I don't see it.
No.
No, it looks like you're.
Is it not?
Okay, your video's just started up again. That's great.
Okay, awesome.
And are you able to share screen again?
I'm gonna try it again. Let's see. I'll do. There we go.
Okay.
Is it working?
Like the watch stream has come up again. So we're starting it up. Yeah, I see it now. I see you're on slide 2, it looks like.
Yep. So we're down to narrative voice. So we're right. Can you see it? Okay. I'll just leave it like that if it's working.
Right. Do you want to, is it possible to make that full screen for you?
Yep.
Great.
There we go. Is that working? Can you see the first slide?
No, it's still showing just the editing view on narrative voice.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's
Now I
doing
see
that.
I see scenes in a novel.
Okay. Can you see the next one?
Elements to include. Yep.
All right. I don't know why it's not working from full
Are you
screen.
clicking the slideshow button at the bottom there?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So maybe we'll just leave it in this editing view. Hopefully people can see that and still
Sorry,
see what you're
everyone.
doing. No
Still
worries.
early on
We're
Sunday.
gonna
I
make
am
it
so
work.
sorry about that.
We're making it work.
It's fine. And I can even email it if everyone, if you want to drop emails, send me a
That'd be great.
message. I'd be happy to email this too if it's easier.
Awesome. Okay. I think we're good
Alrighty.
now. I think we can see your
Are
slides.
we good to go? I am so sorry about that. All right. So can you see narrative voice?
Yep.
Awesome. Alrighty. So when we're going ahead with the narrative voice, you need to consider the point of view of the storyteller in the scene. So typically, you want to have that point of view be the character that is going to make the change in that scene. So if you're writing first person, obviously that's your protagonist and you're in first person. That's pretty easy. But sometimes you're writing in third person, there's more than one character or there's dual point of view. You want to just make sure that the character that you're focusing on is the one who is making the most change in that scene. So in order to get to know your character, you need to know how everything works about them, how they talk, how they move, and that all informs how their narrative voice is going to be. So a lot of times, as an agent, I get these wonderful manuscripts that come in, and sometimes they're dual point of view, multi point of view, but there needs to be a distinction about the way the character sounds when you're reading it, how they work, how they move, how they interact with other people. And you should be able to read a dialogue, right, like a section of dialogue, and know which character that is based on the narrative voice. So you want to make sure that you know who your character is and that it's the best character to propel the story forward. And that goes right into our theme. So the theme, again, is the main idea of anything. So in this context, it's the main idea of your scene. So I really want you to be thinking about the purpose all the time. So is your narrative scene, what are you trying to do for the reader? What are you trying to do for the story? What are you doing for your character? So if you want to convey backstory, you're going to want to do a narrative scene, right? So is it an action scene? Are there lots of things that your character is reacting to? Is it a love scene? Is it a slower paced scene? So all of that is informed by the theme and the purpose of what you're trying to do. So you also want to keep in mind that what type of feelings do you want the reader to be left with at the end of the scene? Is it an informational scene with backstory? Is it comedic? Is it suspenseful? Is it, a dark comedy where there's, a couple of things going on at the same time? You want to be mindful of the type of scene that you're creating, and that will help you in actually writing it out. So the next thing that also informs how you write it is your scene structure, right? So depending on the genre of your book, as well as the purpose of your scene, its structure might differ. So again, a book is not a romance unless it has a happily ever after or a happily for now. So that end scene, you don't even need to write anything. That end scene has to be happy, right? It has to leave your character satisfied, and it has to leave your reader satisfied. So that will definitely inform the rest of your scene. And in a crime novel, it oftentimes begins with the crime, and something terrible happens. There are characters reacting to what happens in that terrible scene that you have just created. So again, when you're going through your scenes and the way you're writing it, what kind of scene are you writing? Are you going to be going straight into dialogue, straight into action, or are you going to have a narrative description? And a lot of times you can include all of those things in the same scene, but as long as it's one continuous thing, if that makes sense. So one other thing that is super, super important in a scene is sensory details, right? So when we're writing, when we're trying to connect with our reader, we're trying to connect with our characters, oftentimes our characters take on a life of their own. We have to make them real for people. Oh, go ahead, Mike. Can you see that?
Sorry, what were you
Did
asking?
you have a question?
Sorry, no, I didn't mean to interrupt if I did.
No worries. I thought someone had a question.
Are we going to be recording the workshop? Yes, we're recording.
Awesome. So, yeah, no worries. And if anyone has questions even after this, feel free, I'm on Twitter, email me. I am happy to answer any questions you have. So again, with sensory detail, you want to think about where this scene is taking place. So is it, on a beach? What time is it? What time period is it? Describe your characters. How are they moving through the world you're creating? What do they see? What do they hear? What do they feel? And the feeling can be both, real textual or, their emotions. What are they feeling? Is there a certain smell? Does it take place at the ocean? All those types of things. And taste, what are the foods? All of these things can help you build world building your scene, and building, your character arc. What do they like? What don't they like? What are their motivations? All of that can help with your sensory detail. So also a good thing I see a lot of, especially on Twitter, Instagram, and people have beautiful, like aesthetic boards for their books. So what is the scene's aesthetic? What are you trying to convey to your reader? If you had to make that Pinterest board, or if you're going to put up an Instagram post, what would be on it and why? So is there music? Is there a sense of a certain color scheme you want to use? Is it creepy? Is it happy? Is it a romance from the Regency period? So all of these things can help inform your writing. It can help with your characters, and again, it helps create your scene and really drop the reader right in. So once we get done with the sensory details, that actually can help you with your stakes. So we need to know, what is the inner or exterior conflict of your character? What stands in the way in their achieving their goal? So, even a scene, although it's one thing, it is always propelling the story forward, and a change has to happen. So it could be something as small as, I'm drinking my coffee on a Sunday morning, but I'm thinking about what I have to do. Or, there are some books where a murder just happened, and the killer's sitting there drinking a cup of coffee. So it really depends on what you want to put into that scene. And then you want to make sure that your point of view character definitely has some goal or some change from the beginning of the scene to the end of the scene. Are they learning something new? Are they left feeling a certain way? Do they have a new, I wouldn't call it an inciting incident, but is there an incident or something that makes them want to move forward, which in turn moves your story forward? So how does that scene set up the next scene and the overall story? So it's just something that you'd want to keep in mind. And right now we're going to get to work. So, whether you are a super plotter, whether you're a pantser, you need to be thinking of your scene. So say, you're a plotter, you have everything outlined, everything's great. That's awesome. But if you're a pantser, this works too, because you have an idea of what you want to write. You have an idea of your characters, and honestly, you can just take it step by step. Who are your characters? What do they want? What's getting in their way? what is their goal and how do they get there. So when you're writing a scene, you want to think about your overall story arc. It absolutely can be subject to change depending on, what happens in your rewrites. But when you're diving in, when you're first writing that first draft, there's just an overall thing that you want to be thinking about. So when you have that down, you want to go scene by scene, and you want to make sure you have the who's in the scene, who is the point of view character. You want the what, so what's going on, what is happening in this scene, where is the scene taking place, because a setting and location, that can be a character in and of itself. So you want to make sure that that is, consistent with either the rest of your story, the time and the place. And then you want to think about how your scene is going to unfold. So how did the characters get to where they are? So even if it's your opening scene and you're dropping the reader into, something that's already happened, something that's going to be taking place, there's still an internal and external conflict for your character. And then you also want to ask yourself, why is this scene happening, and why is it necessary to move the story forward? And like I said before, sometimes we tend to write and overwrite certain scenes, we get too descriptive, and this helps in the editing process, because as you go along, it might be beautiful words, it might be a great, scene, but it's not necessary for the current work you have to propel the story forward. And that's when, you can cut characters out, save your work, maybe use it for another manuscript or something, like that, because I never think an idea is, no ideas are bad, and you may use it, you may, put them together, do a completely new work, but these are all things that you need to be thinking of during a scene. And now, if I would love to take questions, and then we'll work on how to, craft a first scene, and then work on scenes that you might be stuck on if anyone has a work in progress. So I'll stop sharing. I'm so sorry the slides were not working properly. There we go. So does anyone have any questions that I can answer at this point?
Sure, I've got a question.
Sure, go right ahead.
So this was all really great about building an individual scene, but one of the challenges I have is figuring out how to have a good diversity of scenes so that not every scene is the same. Can you talk a little bit about that process, about how you fit that scene into the flow?
Yes, absolutely. So again, a story is, it's made up of separate scenes. Some scenes are the quiet scenes. Some scenes have a lot of action. Some have a lot of dialogue. So when you're trying to tackle how to change your scene, you need to be thinking about what you want for your overall project. So if are you in the middle of a project right now?
Yes.
Okay, so is that okay if we talk? I don't want to make you divulge any information you don't want. But what genre?
Sure, let's
is it?
talk.
Whatever you need, I'm here for you. So.
Thank you.
No
yeah, so I'm writing a fantasy romance that is a mashup of Fae and The Bachelor.
I love it. I think it's great.
So I'm struggling with balancing those aspects, because there's that like fantasy aspect that you want people to get into, but you also want people to see those familiar types of scenes that come up in The Bachelor. So I'm struggling a little bit with that balance, and how sort of how mysterious I want the scene to feel versus how like lighthearted and fun and romantic.
Oh yeah, I think it's like a genre mashup, so which are so fun. So you have, and actually that brings about a good point too. So when you're pitching your project, so I mean, a lot of times, especially my authors on my list now, or even when I was open to queries, there are so many elements to different stories, right? So you have your main genre, and then you have those fantasy elements, you have the contemporary elements, the urban fantasy. So that's when you're thinking about your work as a whole, don't get so stuck on what you need to be doing for that element, I would say dive into your characters. So if now that particular scene, you can convey certain things through dialogue tags. So if you want the snappy banter from like The Bachelor, or the
Yes.
super drama, you could do that in a dialogue, right? You could do that in a dialogue scene. So you could do a setting. So does it take place in, is it like a contemporary fantasy?
Yeah, it takes place in fairy, but it's with a modern heroine.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so when you're talking about your setting too, so the actual location, you can, make note of things, or, do that connection between the bachelor, or, whatever you're trying to do, or like she grabs a cup of coffee or the rose or something that's not working out well. So you can really inform your reader and your characters, depending on doing a switch between like a dialogue opening, a narrative opening. Maybe she's thinking about, what's going on with her scene in the bed. So how far along are you in the whole work?
20K or so. So maybe a third of the way through. Yeah.
Okay. So and then I don't know how much you want to do this in your editing, but sometimes when you're going through the edits, you can highlight, and I think if you have Scrivener, it might do this for you, but you can see where your dialogue is, where your narrative is, where there's more things about setting. So you want to make sure that you have a balance of that, if that makes sense. And then the overall storyline is, you definitely don't have to share it if you don't want to, but can you give me like a little bit about what the overall story is?
Sure. Yeah, there's a Fey prince who's entering his normal competition to see who will rule by his side, and the female protagonist, hapless but awesome human, gets wrapped up in this and decides to pretend to be a Fey and join. So the overall process is her coming to terms with responsibility, that it's not just him at the end, it's like a crown, and then lots of Fey politics and intrigue and humor, I guess.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, that's it. That
Also, thank you.
great.
This is super helpful, but also if other people want help with their scenes, I feel like I'm taking up a lot of this. So thank you.
No worries. So yeah, no, if anyone has questions, and I'm happy, even if we go past our time, please email me, or, I'm on Twitter, just DM me, and we can talk further if you'd like. But yeah, if so, where you have all of those elements, you could definitely, even when your protagonist is like going through the Fey city, or, your setting can inform certain things about the character and about what you want to do. So you can do that through, dialogue itself. Is there like a friendly banter? Is there an attitude problem with your protagonist, and what's going on?
Always.
So yeah, so I mean, and you can show that, and sometimes you might write a scene out and you might not use it, but it will make your brain start working like, oh, okay, no, this is what I was trying to do. So, sometimes, especially when I write as scenes. That's just how I write. It's how I read, sometimes too. So I'm always thinking like, okay, and I know I'm stuck on a certain part, and I know that, okay, I want, friendly banter, then it turns into fighting. And I will literally put that in brackets, but I keep going so that I have a first draft. And then when you go back, you want to go through a scene by scene of the purpose. But if you just want to get your draft out there first, I would say, put a little bracket, like, okay, this scene needs to do this, or how do you want the character to feel? And then just go through it, read it again. And sometimes you have to step away for a day or two and then come back to it, because you can be so, in your own head that you can't think of anything that you might normally if you had a little break. So definitely do that. But yeah, and we can talk about this later too. Absolutely feel free to email me or DM me.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
The what's the point of the scene, I think, is often glossed over when we're writing, but is so important.
But you know
and
what?
the brackets are huge.
Yeah. That's important for editing, right? So your first draft, just write. Don't worry about, what it means, what the purpose is. That's really for, after the fact. So you can have this whole thing. My latest work in progress, I cut out an entire character because they didn't work. I was like, this character's fun. They're great. I love them, but does not serve a point to this story. And I had to cut it, and it was such a better project.
So
again,
painful, but
it's so painful. But you know what? Maybe she'll come in another manuscript somewhere down the line. Who knows? But it wasn't right for this time.
thank you. That was so helpful.
Oh, you're welcome. Anytime. Does anyone else have any questions? Or can you see my screen? Okay, there we go. Yes. Sure. Oh, perfect. That is a great question. And thank you, because I meant to go over that. So, in your scenes, you are going to want to have, so on that last page, and I can, if everyone, it didn't come through okay. So you want to be writing for each scene. Who is in the scene? Who's the point of view character? What's going on in the scene? And those two questions, you just write a sentence about like what's going on in the scene. So after every scene, you can have more than one scene in a chapter. You will have a whole list of what is going on. So basically, your synopsis is really just telling anyone, what is going on in your book. So you're going to take those one sentence from each scene and turn that into your synopsis. And then you can also, figure out, does that actually work? Is that needed? And is that something your character should be doing? Because you can get a full page list of what's going on, the location, your character's motivations, and then that can turn right into your synopsis. Did that answer your question? No problem. And I'm happy to, go into synopsis. That's a very detailed thing in and of itself, and we could talk for so long about that. So if anyone has any extra questions about a synopsis, feel free to ask anytime later, online, anything you need. Okay, so I'm so sorry, let me see. So we got another question about what are some of the pitfalls to avoid when switching between character point of views or from one time frame to another. That's a great question. Completely from, okay, against jumping back and forth. So that is a great question. It really, it depends on your genre too. So oftentimes, like if you're writing a sweeping literary novel, or a crime novel or a mystery, it's gonna typically be third person, jumping around from different perspectives. But in a scene, it needs to remain in one perspective. So you can have multiple point of views in a story, but in one scene it needs to be in that one point of view character. So I would say like a flashback scene, you would want to be in that character's point of view, and then you could have that narrative. You could do something that's going on in the present, reminds them something from the past, and it goes into a flashback. But then it will have to, that person, something changes that they need to address from what's going on in the present to the flashback, and then you can move the scene. And it depends on your story, and without looking at it, I can't give you specifics, but you could do a scene break within that one scene and go to the next one, but it remains in that chapter. Sometimes people do a whole scene and the scene is the chapter. So if you have multiple multiple storylines and multiple perspectives. It just, each scene in and of itself has to be in that one point of view. And yeah, so I hope that answered your question. We have another question. So any tips for scenes that are important for the story, like foreshadowed for the end, but might not seem to move the story? That's a great question. And so I think that those, sometimes you have to add those in after your first draft. So if you have the first draft done, then you go back and you can point to different scenes, like, okay, this would foreshadow, the ending, or it might be a very, very minor detail. It might be something that the character notices. It might be like an attitude of someone. It can depend on your genre too. So if you're writing mystery, there's a lot of those red herrings. You want to get your reader off the real killer or whatever's happening. But it can, I would say it's easier to add in the revision process rather than straight up drafting. So if you have a list in your head of what those important scenes are, I would write out what you want to include, and then just write your first draft, and then as you go back, you can make notes to yourself, like, okay, this was important, I need to fit this in somewhere. Where does it fit? So I hope that helps. Yes, and that's a good point too. So I'm just reading in the chat. So yeah, this scene can have a misdirection purpose too, absolutely. Or, it can be reflective, or, and if there's an unreliable narrator, those quiet scenes can be so impactful later on in the end. So it really depends on what you're using that scene for. But sometimes you might not know until you get that first draft down. And editing, of course, that's where the magic happens. Okay, so perfect. Okay, so Faye, do you have any other questions? You can absolutely do the voice chat too, whatever anyone feels comfortable with. Okay, so I guess what we're working on it. So we'll do the text questions first. So okay, Lauren is working on a series and details for book 1. Okay, which wouldn't make sense if they weren't introduced. Okay, so are you okay? So Lauren, can you give me a little more information? So do you have your entire series written out? Oh, awesome. Is the voice chat working? Yeah, see if it'll work. I know we're working on it. Okay. You see, maybe I can do a hold on 1 second. I can't unmute you either. Hold on. I think they're working on it. I'm so sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, perfect.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes. Thank you.
Hi. Yeah, sorry. I said I would type, but I'm a bit slow right now. I'm one-handed.
I'm so sorry you're one-handed.
Yeah. So I have several books in advance planned out, as well as the first 2 in the series have completed manuscripts.
Awesome. Okay.
But the first one contains some details which don't pay off until the second or third, like referencing an event, introducing a character who just is kind of in the background for the first one. And I've had beta readers tell me, why is this character here? Why is this detail in this scene? And while I've tried to maybe have that character mention of that event have an impact on the protagonist, like kind of in the short term, it does feel a little bit insubstantial, even to myself. So do you have any advice for that?
Okay, so So it's not needed for the first book, but it's needed for the second book. Is that what you're saying? So it makes more sense for the second book?
Yeah, so if I tried to introduce said event or said character later down the line when they actually played a larger role, it feels very sudden. It feels like it's been shoved in there for plot purposes because it's never been referenced before.
Okay, so depending on what type of story it is, you could subtly put clues, if that makes sense, or like reference, like it could even be a sentence. So uh, would you mind sharing a little bit more about your story? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. So
Okay.
it's a bit of a spin on the YA chosen one trope. So it's your protagonist is your very traditional, actually, and unusual for me. He's kind of like you white guy who thinks he's the best thing in the world. And as the story goes on, you start to realize that there's something off about this prophecy. Maybe he's not the chosen one, but he kind of can't get that through his head. Um,
Okay.
and as the ending comes around, you do start to realize like he's not the right person. He gets bitter about it, and he almost becomes the series antagonist as he can't deal with the fact that it wasn't meant to be him. And throughout the first book, when you're meant to be thinking that he's kind of the one you're supposed to be rooting for, he starts to notice these little details, other people who are kind of displeased by the fact that this prophecy is a thing, so on and so forth. And these are the people who later on he will come back to for support as he kind of builds kind of support for himself out of other people who are displeased with this overarching system. In a
Okay.
YA fantasy style.
Okay, that sounds great. So what I would suggest to do in that sense is, so what are you trying to do in the second book that you think is pertinent for that second book that you want to put in the first book? Is it his attitude that towards the other people?
A lot of it's in the characters themselves, because they're characters who, if he thinks he's on top of the world, he wants nothing to do with them. But as soon as he thinks he's been pushed aside, all of a sudden he needs people like this. But they're people who just wouldn't be given that much attention from his point of view in the first book.
Okay, yeah. So I would suggest you could do in the first book, if you want that same character in the second book, like he wants to seek their help and their counsel, that maybe they interact, at someplace at a store, or they're trying to help him and he's just like, no, I'm too good for you. I'm not going to talk to you. I don't need you. And it can be like a really quick scene of just they're together. I would definitely put them in some sort of situation, and then later on in that book too, you can develop that later, if that makes sense.
Back to them in a later scene in book one to make it seem like they're a bit more of a running theme, or do you think that would be just another extraneous detail?
No, I think you could definitely do that as, a recurring theme, but you could absolutely play on your protagonist like interior and exterior conflict. So, he's having or she's having these conflicts with, this person, and then, we can see how your character is just taken over by, obsession and narcissism. And honestly, that it just from hearing it, not from reading it, I don't know if you've seen Falcon and Winter Soldier. So the new
Mhm.
Captain America, that's a great example. And like, if a lot of times, again, writing scenes, it can be helpful to look at TV shows and movies
Mhm.
and see how they're portraying that through, images, and then you can translate that into your writing.
I'd never actually, that's a really good example. I have been watching that and I've never actually connected those two together.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
but yeah,
absolutely.
mhm. But yeah, thank you very much.
Oh,
I'll keep
you're
that in mind.
welcome. Okay, so all right, Faye, you are next. Let's see your question. Okay. Okay. Let me see. So, Faye, can you hear me okay? Mute. Sure. No problem. No problem at all. Oh, sorry. Okay, so I'm still trying to monitor the chat, and then if I miss you, please, just retype it in the chat in case I didn't see it the first time. So let me see. Hold on one second. Okay, perfect. And Brad, if you need me to talk about it some more, I'm absolutely happy to do that. Okay, so I will say I'm going to try to answer some of it with talking to you directly at first, and we'll see if that helps, and we can always go on more than that. So, you're saying transitions are what's hard, and that's what's losing people in the scenes. Okay, so we have different point of views with different tonal changes. That's fine, and actually that's great, because the different point of views, you want it to be a different tone, so we know who the character is that's speaking and who is going to be making the change. Oh, I like that. So one character is literally death. All right, and the narrator. Okay. Okay, so I know that's a great question. So what my best advice, without being able to read it or look at it, is the different point of views. As long as each scene is in one point of view, it's going to be okay. So if you have that transition that they're all reacting to something, some information, are they reacting to the setting, are they reacting to something that's happened to all of them, or some is death trying to take over somebody, and then who and are you stuck on who your narrator is, or it's just third person, and just it hops around to everyone's head? Okay, so there are sharp transitions. So without looking at it, I would say it might be, as long as the transition makes sense, even if it's sharp, that if it flows, as long as it's flowing to like a main goal or a main change, or they're all reacting to something. So I guess transitions can't just come out of nowhere. They have to kind of make sense. But again, it could be like a completely different scene. So if it depends on, how your narrative is, and how your voice is overall in the story. So if you're wanting, I guess it would be, it has to have some connectivity, if that makes sense. So there has to be one main thing that's going on, or they're all trying for the same goal. They're all feeling a certain way for it to make sense. So I hope that that makes sense. But without knowing the full scope, or like a little bit about, if you could give me like a little summary in a couple sentences, that could probably help a little better. No problem. Sounds good. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so thank you, Faye. So yeah, I just needed a little context to guide you in the right direction. So now the narrator, is that throughout the entire manuscript? So as long as you have that third person narrator, although they're looking at examples from the other characters, it would make sense, and it can make sense out of your overall what you're trying to do for the story. Let me see. So is that what you're going for, though? Do you want the reader to be like, are we in the same book? What is going on? Is that what you're trying to convey? Okay. You know what? I honestly, I think without seeing it, so if I saw it, it would be I would be much clearer information and help. So I do apologize if it's coming out like in bits and pieces. But you might want to consider. So is that just the first few scenes? You might want to just put that in a prologue. And I know that there's heated debate on whether prologues are necessary, if they work. But in this sense, what you don't want to do is lose your reader or make your reader frustrated, because they're not going to want to, keep reading your stories. So, it sounds like it's a very cleverly thought out structure, and it can be a lot of fun for the reader to, be doing all of these things. But I think you might want to start off with putting it as a prologue, because that way it's not necessarily part of the actual narrative of the rest of your story, but you get a sense of what to expect. And I think that might be something you want to play around with. So I hope that helps. Oh, thank you. I'm so glad. I'm glad to be helpful. I know it's really difficult sometimes without, talking about your work and reading your work, especially when it comes to scene construction. So I know this is a very broad and overview of what to do for a scene. But yeah, we can, I am happy to go through specifics for anyone if anyone's having issues or having trouble. So let's see. Rochelle asks, what is the common thread between the scenes? Oh, are you asking Faye that question? So yeah, that's so if any scene needs to be moving the story forward. Yeah, so that's a great point. Thank you, Rochelle. So yeah, there has to be a common thread with the actual narrative of the scene. Otherwise, you will lose your readers. Yes, so info dump scenes. And I know it can get confusing between a narrative scene and letting that unfold in an actual info dump. So an info dump is just when you are giving all of this information about the world, about things that we as readers, the characters themselves, don't really need to know, but you as the author need to know. So I hope that's helpful. So you should know before going into your writing everything your character likes. Like we talked about the sensory things, right? So we need to know, what does your character, you should know them inside and out. What are their motivations? What music do they listen to? What music do they hate? What do they do for a job? What would they like to do? If they went out just for fun, what would that be? But you don't have to tell the reader that. That's just something you need to internalize and know. So for a narrative scene, you want to make sure that, again, you're putting all of those elements into that scene, and that your character is reacting to something, so it serves a purpose. So is that purpose telling us about something that happened, very minor backstory? Is that something that can be woven into the larger narrative? Sometimes you can use action tags and dialogue to describe your setting. So usually if there is a large portion of info dumping, I would say, really look at it. What were you trying to say in that actual info dump block? And then try to piece things out of the info dump and put them in other places in the narrative. So maybe it can be explained through dialogue. It can be explained through an interaction with the character. It can be explained by their observations of their surroundings. So it's just a matter of taking it apart and spreading it back out again in a way that it makes sense. No problem. Let's see. So try the end scene. Okay, so Faye, is your book completed, or are you still working on it? Oh wow, okay, so that's great. I if So for the overall narrative, how does it flow? Is it going back and forth? Is it that separate narrator? Okay, so do you need the narrator? Is the narrator going to be a prominent character throughout? So I would say if you're already 75,000 words in and the narrator is not in there a lot, I what is the purpose of the narrator? Okay, so question for you. So do you um so how many main characters do you have? Is it just that one character in death, or are there more? Um okay. Okay, so are they all, do they have the same amount of scene time, actually, if that makes sense. Okay. Okay, so in terms of the narrator though, it is what is their only purpose is to talk about the afterlife? Yeah, that's a great suggestion too. So yeah, I think okay. So I think so. It sounds like you're playing with the narrator and playing with structure. So if as long as it's consistent through the book, I think you might want to add parts for the narrator if it's really slim pickings of their point of view in there, and you have to make sure, even though that sounds it sounds really fun and to play with the reader, you just want to make sure that that's prevalent in your manuscript. So if it's only in certain parts, even though it might seem like a fun thing to do, really ask yourself what the purpose of the narrator is, and if some other character or side character, smaller character, could be doing the same thing as that narrator. If that makes sense. But again, I mean, without seeing the whole manuscript, it might make perfect sense the way you have it. So I'm just, as you're going through it, just think to yourself, is there enough parts where the narrator is actually telling the story or giving the reader something that we don't know? So if you want to keep the narrator, and there's not that many, scenes with the narrator voice, make sure it's consistent, if that makes sense. So wherever it is currently in the manuscript, like maybe the narrator chimes in, the character does something, and at the beginning of each chapter or every other chapter, the narrator comes in and gives a commentary, and that would make sense. Yes. So yeah, it's I honestly, I love books that play with the reader, or there's a different structure to it, and it really makes you think, and it really cements you into that world. But you do absolutely have to have a certain set of rules so that it definitely makes sense. So readers, you do want to surprise them. Sometimes you want people to think, but you also have to have a flow, so that, okay, we know that there are these characters, there's Frank, and then there's Death, and there's the two other characters, but we know that this narrator is going to come in at every beginning scene and let us know something or tell us what it is. So yeah, you never ever want to lose your reader, so you want to make sure that your reader is there, they're reading, and they want to keep turning the page, and you don't want to frustrate them so much that they're like, okay, this makes no sense, when your story is great and you want them to read it. Yes, exactly. So surprise them, but do it consistently. So yeah, so there are, expectations of, rules to follow, like who we're expecting to speak. And, we have a structure that makes sense, but surprise them within that narrative. That's a great way to look at it. Sounds good. Does anyone else have any questions or any other, scenes that are tricky that I can help with? Let's see. Oh, perfect. Okay. So oh, no problem. My pleasure. And yeah, I think a good way to look at the whole thing is, just what is the purpose of your scene, what characters need to be in there. And I know 5 point of views is really hard. So yeah, you just want to make sure that you're not just throwing things in there to throw things in there, that there is, you have that linear arc, or you can play with structure and do yeah, exactly. That's how I feel writing a lot of times myself. Yeah, so it makes sense, right? And you have this arc, that arc goes here, goes here, goes there. But yeah, so you want to make sure that there's a beginning, middle, and end, and it makes sense. So, but you also want to make sure not only does it make sense to you, but it makes sense to the reader, and that it's I would say satisfying and fulfilling. Even if you don't like the outcome of the story, you want it to be a satisfying ending and not be so hard to follow that they're taken out of the story. And I will tell you that is one of the reasons when we do get queries in, that it might be a great query letter, it might be a great pitch. The first like 50 pages are really suck you right in, but then it drops off because then it just makes no sense, and it didn't stay consistent with the narrative and messaging and what it's promising in the beginning, if that makes sense. I love it now. That's great. So yeah, it's just, when you're constantly, no matter what genre you're writing in, you're constantly like world building. Things need to flow. Things need to, make sense for the characters, make sense for you, and make sense for the reader. And, that doesn't have to happen in the first draft. It doesn't have to happen in revisions. That's just for your final draft. So yes, you can be that way. Like, this makes sense. It's all great. You should see my notebooks. Like, when I'm writing, I have stuff in Word, I have separate notes here, I have a separate notebook. Sometimes it's easy for me. I'm a very visual learner, visual person, which is why scene writing is so great, and it makes sense in my head. But sometimes I'll do like a different color pen, and that character has purple, and this character is in green, and my narrative goes in this color. And you can put that in Word too. And sometimes I'll look at a scene and be like, what did I just write? That makes no sense at all. But then you go back and you use those tricks of who's in this scene, what's going on. And then sometimes when you talk too, it's like, did I have a point to what I was just saying? And yes, you do, but you need to streamline it with your scenes. Yes, exactly. Google Drive folders for days. And that is actually, when I was mentioning, the Pinterest board, sometimes that is helpful. So it's like you're looking at the words you're writing and you're like, where was I going with this? Or you wake up and you're like, oh, I just totally fixed that plot point. I know what I'm going to put in the scene. And then you go and you sit down to write it or type it out or like dictate it out, and you have no idea what you were just saying, but something might remind you, or it might be like an image, it might be a song, it might be what you were doing that morning. And a lot of times I like to, I wouldn't say block things out like in an acting scene, but sometimes that can help too. It's like, what were you trying to do with your character? What types of clothing, how are they moving, and how are they moving in their world, in their scene, and in the larger world you're creating. Absolutely, go right ahead now. I can't hear you. I don't know, but I think it says you're unmuted. I'm not sure why it's not working.
Sorry, sometimes I have technical difficulties on my
No worries. I can hear you now.
thing. It was definitely a me thing, not a Discord thing. So I guess my question would be, what advice do you have for writing the sort of like more, I don't want to say boring scenes, but that's kind of how I'm thinking of them, like everyday stuff where it's moving the story in the sense that, you know, there's not really anything huge happening, but at the same time there might be subtle conversations that are going on, or, you know, you might just need a transition scene that's more of like an in-between point.
Sure,
So
that's a great
lots of
question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're thinking of a scene, it needs to just have some sort of change. So that change doesn't have to be like this, you know, huge epiphany or like this action blow up scene. Everything gets ridiculous. It can literally be like your character is thinking of something, reflecting on something. So that's still a change. It's still a reaction to events that occurred. And then you can set it up for things that are going to come, if that makes sense to you. So like she could be, sitting at a kitchen table and drinking some coffee that reminds her of what she has to do like the next day, or taking a break from the craziness that just happened prior to that. So do you have like a specific scene in mind? Have you written it yet?
I sort of. I have a whole bunch of scenes that are all completely unconnected. They're in different, they're in different Google Docs. I need to connect them eventually into the main thing. But one of them, there's two that I think could connect really well. The first is like the sort of introduction to, or no, actually, sorry. The first is, it's a murder mystery, sort of. It's like a supernatural urban fantasy murder mystery in San Francisco. And the first scene that I would need to connect is the actual murder, because the main character witnesses this murder, but it's like, it's not clear immediately how exactly it happens, and he doesn't see the person in detail. He just sees this body and is like, oh my god, someone's dead, type of thing. And then the second scene that would need to get connected to that is that he's sitting at the table eating breakfast, ironically, like you just said. And he hears on the news they're talking about how the police found a body, and it's at the corner where he was, and he's like, oh shit, that's the body, that's the body.
Yeah. So there you, honestly, that was going to be my suggestion to you. So if that was the change, right? So he's sitting there quiet. He's, eating breakfast, drinking his coffee. The change happens when he's just in that moment, he's only focused on eating, right? But then when he hears the news or sees the news, that was the body, there's a change in his internal, the internal conflict, and like, oh my goodness, like, do I do something with this? So what do I do? I saw that body, I was there, what do I do now? And that is the change that will propel you to the next scene. So you already did that, it sounds like.
Sort of. I have to get it all in the same Word document, and sounding cohesive together.
Yeah. So I would ask you, do you have this scene, or do you know what's going to happen after that scene?
The main thing, I guess, would be for him to start his sort of investigative role, because he's not a detective of any kind. He's not in that role. He's actually a bartender.
Love it.
But he, the person who was murdered is the ex of his best friend, and his best friend is being accused of the murder. So,
oh wow, okay. So
then it would, have to go into that.
Yeah, you got a lot going on there. So did he recognize the body first of who it was? Or was it like a wrong place at a wrong time type thing? And that's why was he at the murder scene, or why did he see the body?
So he saw the body because, so a little bit of context, there's the bar that he works at is like, it has magical entrances So they changed the location of the entrance, like from night to night. And when he exits, the scene starts with him exiting from a manhole. And he's like, I can't believe they put me at this intersection. It's so far from home. And then as he's thinking about that, the murder happens. And he's like, oh, and he doesn't actually see who it is. He doesn't see in that moment. But shortly after he hears the police report, an actual detective comes by the house and is like, yeah, it was this person, and we're looking into your friend because she was talking about curses and like killing and like being really mad at the ex. So we're looking into her.
Okay, so did he report the dead body, or he just happened?
No,
the detective
he just happened to be there. Yeah.
Okay. So is there a reason he didn't report it? Is it because it was just like not his thing? He's a supernatural being and he's leaving?
Mostly because it was really jarring for him, because the way the antagonist, there's a very focused thing about how the antagonist brings silence and darkness with them. So basically, the murder scene is everything goes completely quiet. Like there's no background noise. There's no, like, it's just complete silence. Like you're in a sensory deprivation tank almost.
Okay.
And then everything comes rushing back in and he sees this body.
Okay, so then he just goes home out of fear, doesn't want to deal
basically
with it.
he just goes home because he's like, I am 20 something, I don't know what's happening here, I don't want to believe that's a dead body. I'm gonna just I'm gone.
Yeah, so peace out, I'm out of here. So do you convey that in your manuscript? Like, does he react that way in there, or you just cut to the breakfast scene?
No, I do have him react that way. And there's also another character in that scene who's very important, who also sees the murder. Who he has actually met before. They are a shapeshifter, and so he's actually met them in his bar, but he doesn't realize because they're in a different form. And so they're like, you should probably get home, and kind of are offering a little bit of foreshadowing. And he's just like, you're serious? There's a body and you're acting really casual. So he just goes, he's gone. It's a little hard to explain without actually like showing the text.
Yeah, and that was great. So honestly, he needs to process what just happened and what he's going to do next. So I think the breakfast scene, you have a bunch of different options you could go with. So he could, if the detective comes over and is asking questions and he's like, oh my God, I know who that is, he needs to like come to realize, like, what do I do? So that can be your next scene. Like, does he go reach out to that friend? Does he try to look for that person that he saw last night that told him to run away? Does he tell the detective? Does the detective want him to do other things? So you can, that scene needs to be what he's going to decide to do. If that I hope that makes sense.
Oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. No problem. So yeah, that sounds like a great story though. That sounds awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So, and I think, Brad, you had a question. So let me check on that. Okay. So you have a scene, two teachers visiting a, oh, I love it. Okay, that's fine. That's good. And Brad, can you unmute, or will it not let you?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. Just I think it'll be easier because I need a little bit more context. So, okay, so you have these two teachers and they're visiting a museum. Is it part of their school? Like, do they have students with them, or are they just going to this museum?
No, so just going to the museum, one with his family, and they basically invite the protagonist too.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, so they're at this museum, and now is the villain completely separate? Like it's just this other character coming into the museum?
No, because basically, I have two POV. One
Okay.
being my main character, and other being the villain.
I love that.
And basically, I have both scenes that when they confront each other, and another thing where they're both separate.
Okay.
And sometimes basically in this chapter, what I did is like I have like one part that is following the hero, and other part following the villain.
Oh, okay. All right. So you can so is it just it's strictly dual point of view throughout the entire book?
Yes.
Okay, so that works. So if you're doing dual point of view and you need that you need to introduce other things, you could do a scene break within the chapter. So if usually in dual point of view it's like one chapter's in one point of view, the next chapter's in the next point of view, but there are you can go and do breaks within each chapter. So if that's easier for you and that makes more sense if they're in the museum because that's what's connecting them, they're in the same place at the same time, you could do a scene break or you could just do a completely separate chapter. And I think either one would work.
Yeah. Well, basically, it's because my main point was like the main thing that was connected to him because at the same time the villain is basically as at a Comic-Con.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because basically the idea is like both have like very two similar, similar, completely different lifestyle and ideologies in every way.
Okay, yeah, and on it, you could put that within if it's dialogue. You could put that in like tags almost. Like, is there something about like he's saying something and they have completely different lifestyles. Like maybe it's he's thinking about like looking at his clothes and making a comment in his head about that, or makes a comment, a snide remark because they have different ideologies. So you could really play around with that with what they're actually saying to each other, and then your action or description tags within the dialogue. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there could be a lot of those, and you could really play around with what exactly they're saying to each other and how they're reacting to what they're seeing in the museum too. So that's a fun location. I like that for a setting.
Okay.
I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey everyone, I'm back. It's Mike. Are there any final questions? Looks like it was a fantastic session, Jessica.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry about the PowerPoint, everyone, in the beginning, but hey, that's how it goes, right?
No worries. These things are expected, but I think everyone got a lot out of it. We're coming up on our 90 minutes official time, but if there are final questions, then hey, great comment from Rochelle. This is my favorite session so far. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rochelle. It was great having you on. I really appreciate, how early it is too on a Sunday, and you came to join me. I appreciate that.
Especially for the West Coast folks. Yeah.
Yes.
So did everyone get their questions answered? I think so.
Thanks. And if not, I am, as Mike said, I do run a Twitter chat, and my DMs are always open for writers because, it's so important to have some support system. And, at any time, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thanks for that offer. And if anyone wants to send a follow-up question to us or to Jessica, I'm going to post my email address in 1 second here, and you can just email me. Feel free. I'm pretty good on getting back to people. So, well, thank you, Jessica. It was
thank you all for joining.
Good engagement. And if you would like to keep in touch, We'll certainly we can add you to our email list. The link is above. It's the WriterHive 5. You'll get every week. You can book a one-on-one session with Jessica, and we're going to be offering you 10% off that and anything on our site because you've participated today. And what else can I tell you? Yeah, find Jessica on Twitter. I'll post that link as well in a second. And thanks everyone for participating.
Thanks so much, everyone. It was great chatting with you all.